Engineer Charles laughed heartily on the factory floor when Sister Helen, 35, said, "I can fix that industrial machine." He scoffed. "A nun would never know how to do that." She picked up the tools with steady, determined hands. What happened in the following minutes froze the laughter on his face forever. Her name was Sister Helen Christine, a 35-year-old woman whose brown eyes held the serenity of someone who had found her purpose in life, but also a quiet determination few perceived at first glance. On that sunny Tuesday morning, she walked through the bustling streets of the city's industrial district, carrying a worn brown leather briefcase and several bags of donations she had collected at the parish the previous week. Her mission was simple yet profoundly meaningful to her: to visit Sterling Metalworks, to deliver food baskets to employees facing financial hardship, and to speak with those in need of spiritual or emotional support. The factory was an imposing red brick building that stretched for almost 2 entire blocks, with tall smokestacks releasing constant steam and the rhythmic sound of machines echoing through open windows. Helen had visited that place only twice before, always accompanied by Father Michael, but this time she was alone because the priest had fallen ill the night before. She took a deep breath before approaching the main gate, adjusting the white veil that covered her brown hair and checking that all the food baskets were well organized in her bag. The security guard, Mr. Anthony, a gray-haired black man with a welcoming smile, waved to her as soon as he recognized her walking toward the entrance. "Sister Helen, how are you today? It's good to see you here again," he said as he rose from his chair to open the gate. "The employees knew you were coming today, and many are eager to talk, especially the second shift crew who are having some difficulties at home." Helen smiled warmly and replied that she was doing very well and was happy to be there to help in any way she could, asking about his family and if his granddaughter had recovered from the flu. As she walked through the factory's inner yard, Helen observed the intense movement of the workers carrying metal parts back and forth, the constant coming and going of forklifts transporting materials, and the synchronized dance of men and women working with precision at their respective stations. The smell of lubricating oil and heated metal brought her a strange sensation, a mix of nostalgia and melancholy she couldn't fully explain, but which stirred something deep in her memory. It was as if those sounds and aromas awakened dormant memories of a time she had chosen to leave behind many years ago. The production supervisor, Mr. Robert, met her with a gentle smile and led her to the employee break room, a modest but clean space where workers ate their meals and relaxed during breaks. Helen began to arrange the food baskets on a large blue Formica table, carefully separating each one according to the size of the families who would receive them. As she did so, she chatted animatedly with the people who approached, asking about their lives, their challenges, and their accomplishments, always with a listening ear and words of encouragement ready. It was in this moment of tranquility and human connection that destiny was about to place Helen before a situation that would test not only her faith and patience, but also reveal a side of her personality she had kept hidden for over 15 years. The deafening sound of a machine failing echoed throughout the factory, followed by shouts of alarm and the metallic clang of parts colliding violently. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine when she heard that specific sound, a noise she knew all too well and which immediately transported her back to her youth. The crash from the main production sector made Helen immediately stop what she was doing, dropping the food basket she held in her hands and turning toward the sound with a look of genuine concern on her face. It was the kind of noise not easily forgotten, the unmistakable sound of an industrial machine completely losing control and potentially endangering lives. Mr. Robert ran toward the main bay, shouting for everyone to remain calm while employees began to gather, trying to understand what had happened to the most important piece of equipment on the entire production line. The machine that had failed was a gigantic hydraulic press, responsible for shaping the metal parts that constituted the factory's flagship product. Without it functioning properly, the entire operation would be paralyzed, affecting not only already tight delivery deadlines, but also the livelihood of hundreds of families who depended on that company to survive. Helen discreetly followed in the direction of the commotion, staying close enough to observe the situation, but far enough not to hinder the problem-solving efforts that were surely to come. From where she stood, she could clearly see the machine stopped in an odd position, with steam escaping from several different parts and a hydraulic oil leak spreading rapidly across the concrete floor. The more experienced workers cautiously approached the equipment, but it was evident that none of them had enough technical knowledge to diagnose the problem, much less solve it. Their expressions of concern and anxious whispers among them revealed how critical that situation was for the functioning of the entire company. Mr. Robert was clearly desperate, pacing back and forth as he spoke rapidly on the phone with someone Helen presumed to be the factory owner or a specialized technician. She overheard fragments of the conversation where he explained that the machine had simply seized during a routine operation, that there had been a strange noise before the complete shutdown, and that now they couldn't even restart the main system. The estimated time to get a specialized technician to the factory would be at least 2 days, time they definitely did not have due to commitments already made to clients. Employees began to gather in small groups, quietly discussing the possible consequences of the unexpected breakdown. Helen heard concerns about potential layoffs if production remained halted for too long, discussions about how to explain delivery delays to important clients, and speculations about how much money the company would lose for every hour the machine remained out of operation. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and her heart ached as she witnessed the silent despair of those hard-working people whose financial security was threatened by a mechanical failure. It was in this moment of uncertainty and widespread anxiety that Helen felt something stirring within her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in many years. It was as if a dormant part of her soul was slowly awakening, bringing with it memories of a time when she was known for her exceptional skill with complex machines and equipment. Her hands unconsciously began to form fists, and she noticed her eyes were fixed on the faulty machine with an intensity that surprised her. As she observed the stalled hydraulic press, Helen began to notice details that had apparently gone unnoticed by everyone else present. The specific position in which the machine had stopped, the pattern of the oil leak, the type of steam escaping from the valves, and even the angle at which certain parts were positioned provided her with valuable clues about what might have caused the catastrophic failure. It was as if her mind was automatically analyzing and processing technical information she thought she had completely forgotten after so many years dedicated exclusively to religious life and pastoral work. It was exactly at this moment of tension and uncertainty that a loud authoritative voice echoed throughout the bay, cutting through the workers' worried conversations like a sharp blade through delicate fabric. Engineer Charles Albert Sutton had just arrived at the factory, driving his silver-imported car and wearing an impeccable suit that contrasted drastically with the simple, oil-stained clothes of the factory workers. He was a tall, thin man, approximately 42 years old, with slicked back hair and a permanent expression of superiority etched onto his angular, always well-groomed face. Charles walked through the factory with long, confident strides, carrying an expensive Italian leather briefcase and speaking loudly on his cell phone about matters he clearly considered far more important than the desperate situation unfolding right in front of him. He had been hired by the parent company only 3 months prior, coming from a multinational corporation where he held a technical management position, and since his arrival, he made sure to make it abundantly clear to everyone that he was the most qualified and intelligent person in any environment he frequented. When he finally hung up the phone and focused his attention on the stalled machine, Charles sighed exaggeratedly and shook his head with an expression of disdain that made it evident how much he considered the situation an unnecessary annoyance in his busy schedule. He approached the hydraulic press with the air of someone doing an immeasurable favor for people who clearly didn't deserve his exceptional expertise, and began to superficially examine the equipment, touching a few parts here and there without truly concentrating on a proper diagnosis. Mr. Robert rushed to meet the engineer with an expression of relief mixed with anxiety, quickly explaining the entire situation and imploring Charles to find a quick solution that would allow production to resume before losses became even greater. Charles interrupted him with an impatient wave of his hand and condescendingly replied that he would obviously solve the problem, but that it would take some time to perform a proper professional diagnosis, as he was dealing with people who clearly lacked sufficient technical knowledge to understand the complexity of that type of equipment. As Charles continued his superficial inspection, making sarcastic comments about the machine's inadequate maintenance and openly criticizing the competence of the workers present. Helen observed his every move with growing irritation. She could clearly see that the engineer was more concerned with demonstrating his supposed intellectual superiority than with effectively solving the problem that was affecting the lives of so many hard-working and dedicated people. Charles's arrogance became more evident with each passing minute, especially when he began making disparaging jokes about the factory employees' capabilities, suggesting that problems like this were inevitable when working with people who lacked proper formal education. He laughed at his own jokes while randomly fiddling with some machine components, clearly without a specific plan or adequate methodology to identify the true source of the failure. Helen felt her patience rapidly draining as she watched that pathetic display of inflated ego disguised as technical competence. Every disrespectful comment Charles made about the factory employees deeply irritated her, not only because she had developed a genuine affection for those people during her previous visits, but also because she could clearly see that the engineer was completely lost in his attempt to diagnose the machine's actual problem. It was when Charles made a particularly cruel comment about the workers' ignorance regarding modern industrial equipment that Helen felt something ignite within her chest. It was a mix of indignation at the injustice she was witnessing and a growing urgency to intervene to help people who clearly deserved much more respect and consideration than they were receiving. Her hands began to tremble slightly, not from fear or nervousness, but from a contained energy she hadn't felt in many years, a force that came directly from her determination to make a difference when they needed it most. To fully understand the transformation happening within Helen at that moment, it was necessary to go back in time to her youth, when she was still just a 16-year-old girl named Helen Christine Miller, the proud daughter of Master John Miller, one of the most respected and skilled industrial mechanics in the entire metropolitan area. Her father owned a workshop specializing in heavy equipment maintenance that served factories, construction, and mining companies, a business he had built from scratch with his own hands and which represented his family's honest livelihood. From a very young age, Helen demonstrated an insatiable curiosity for everything involving machines, engines, and mechanical equipment. While other girls her age played with dolls or were interested in clothes and makeup, she preferred to spend hours in her father's workshop, observing his every move as he disassembled and reassembled complex parts, with a precision that bordered on art. Master John initially hesitated to let his daughter get so deeply involved in that traditionally masculine environment, but he soon realized that Helen possessed an exceptional natural talent that would be a terrible waste not to properly develop. Gradually, Helen began to effectively help with workshop tasks, starting with simple tool organization and rapidly progressing to diagnosing complex problems in equipment that left even experienced mechanics scratching their heads in confusion. She had an almost supernatural ability to hear the sound of a malfunctioning machine and identify exactly which component was failing, where the problem was located, and what would be the best way to fix it without causing additional damage to the system. During her teenage years, Helen became a true prodigy of industrial mechanics, capable of working with hydraulic presses, industrial lathes, high-pressure compressors, and complex pneumatic systems with an ease that impressed experienced clients visiting her father's workshop. She knew every bolt, every valve, every hydraulic circuit, and every electrical system as if they were extensions of her own body, and she developed innovative diagnostic techniques that allowed her to solve problems in a fraction of the time other professionals would take. Master John glowed with pride whenever he saw his daughter working with such competence and dedication, and began to dream of the day he could officially pass the business on to her, creating a family dynasty of specialized mechanics that would endure for generations. Helen shared this dream and was genuinely enthusiastic about the prospect of expanding the workshop, perhaps even specializing in specific types of industrial equipment or offering technical consulting services for larger companies. However, at 19, something fundamental changed in Helen's life, in a way neither she nor her family could foresee or fully comprehend at the time. During a visit to the local church for Sunday Mass, she experienced what she would later describe as a deep and irresistible spiritual calling, that made her question all the plans she had made for her professional future. It was as if a silent but powerful inner voice was telling her that her true purpose in life was related to serving other people in a more direct and spiritual way. Helen began to dedicate more and more time to parish activities, helping with volunteer work for underprivileged families, visiting lonely elderly people in nursing homes, and participating in prayer groups that met during the week. The more she became involved with this type of work, the more she felt she had found something that filled a void in her soul that not even her passion for mechanics could completely satisfy. It was as if she had discovered a fundamental piece of her identity that had been missing during all those years of exclusive dedication to the world of machines and industrial equipment. Helen's decision to leave the workshop and pursue a religious life didn't happen suddenly, but was a gradual and painful process that spanned almost 2 years of intense internal conflicts and difficult conversations with her family. Master John initially tried to be understanding and patient, believing it was just a fleeting phase of existential questioning typical of youth, something that would naturally pass once she realized the responsibility and prestige that would come with taking control of the family workshop. However, as the months passed and Helen became increasingly involved with religious activities and less interested in the family business, the tension at home began to grow exponentially. Master John felt as if he was losing not only his daughter, but also the future he had dreamed of and carefully planned during so many years of hard work and dedication. He had invested considerable time, energy, and resources teaching Helen everything he knew about industrial mechanics, hoping she would continue and expand the legacy he had built from scratch. Helen's mother, Mrs. Mary, initially tried to serve as a mediator between father and daughter, but soon found herself torn between supporting her daughter's spiritual dreams and preserving the family unity that seemed to be disintegrating before her eyes. She saw Helen's genuine suffering when forced to choose between her religious vocation and family expectations, but also witnessed Master John's deep pain as he watched his plans for the workshop's future completely collapse. Discussions at home became increasingly frequent and intense, with Master John arguing that Helen was throwing away an extraordinary talent and a unique opportunity to build something significant in the real world, while she tried to explain that she felt an irresistible calling to serve God in a more direct and dedicated way. Conversations often ended in tears and prolonged silences, creating an atmosphere of constant tension that affected all aspects of family life. The decisive moment arrived when Helen officially announced her intention to enter the convent of the Sisters of Charity, a decision she had made after months of prayer, reflection, and spiritual counseling with the local parish priest. Master John reacted with an explosion of anger and disappointment that surprised even Helen, who had always known her father as a calm and controlled man. He yelled that she was being selfish and ungrateful, wasting years of investment and preparation in the name of religious fantasies that would bring no real benefit to anyone. The argument culminated with Master John declaring that if Helen chose religious life over the family workshop, she would no longer be welcome at home and that he would consider her no longer his daughter. These were words spoken in the heat of the moment, motivated by pain and a feeling of betrayal, but they caused a deep wound in Helen's heart that would remain sensitive for many years to come. Mrs. Mary desperately tried to convince her husband to reconsider his position, but he was determined to make Helen understand the real consequences of her choice. Helen left the family home on a rainy April morning, carrying only a small suitcase with some clothes and her few most precious personal belongings. She looked one last time at the workshop where she had spent the most formative years of her youth, breathing in the familiar smell of oil and metal that still awakened a painful nostalgia in her heart. She knew she was making the right decision for her spiritual life, but she couldn't deny the deep sadness she felt at leaving behind not only her family, but also a fundamental part of her identity that had been shaped among wrenches, hydraulic presses, and humming engines. During her first years in the convent, Helen constantly fought against the temptation to return home and try to reconcile with her father, especially when she received news through mutual acquaintances about how Master John was struggling to keep the workshop running properly without her specialized help. However, she forced herself to remain firm in her decision, channeling all her energy and determination into the pastoral work and charitable activities that became her new vocation and purpose in life. Back in the present, Helen watched Charles continue his incompetent inspection of the broken machine with a growing mix of frustration and determination she hadn't felt in many years. Every arrogant comment from the engineer about the supposed ignorance of the factory employees awakened an indignation in her that went far beyond simple empathy for the people being humiliated in front of her. It was as if all the experience and knowledge she had acquired during her formative years in her father's workshop were crying out for an opportunity to be useful again. When Charles finally admitted, reluctantly and full of elaborate excuses, that he would need at least a few days to get the necessary parts and perform the proper repairs, Helen felt she could no longer remain silent, watching that unjust situation unfold. She calmly approached the group of people surrounding the machine, discreetly adjusting the veil that covered her hair and taking a deep breath to control the nerves that were beginning to emerge after so many years of dormancy. Mr. Robert was visibly desperate at the prospect of keeping the factory shut down for so long, mentally calculating the financial losses and possible consequences for the jobs of his most dedicated employees. It was in this moment of silent despair that Helen spoke up for the first time, with a calm but firm voice that cut through the anxious conversations like an unexpected ray of hope emerging amidst a storm. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the supervisor directly with respectful politeness, but without any hesitation in her posture. "I can take a look at this machine and perhaps help solve the problem without needing to wait so many days for parts or specialized technicians." All conversations stopped abruptly, and Helen felt dozens of eyes turn to her, with expressions ranging from genuine surprise, polite skepticism, and well-intentioned curiosity. Charles was the first to react, and his reaction was exactly the kind of arrogant contempt Helen had anticipated, but which nonetheless hit her with surprising emotional force. He let out a loud, artificial laugh that echoed throughout the bay, shaking his head exaggeratedly, as if he had just heard the most absurd joke of his entire life. "A nun fixing an industrial hydraulic press," he said loudly for all to hear. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire professional career." Helen felt her face flush slightly, but she maintained her outward composure, fixing her gaze directly on Charles's eyes, with a serenity that hid the storm of emotions forming within her chest. She knew that reaction was predictable, considering not only her current appearance, but also the deeply ingrained prejudices about gender, social class, and technical capability that men like Charles carried as badges of honor in their inflated egos. The engineer continued his demonstration of arrogance, explaining to the present employees how modern industrial equipment required years of specialized formal education and extensive practical experience that obviously a person dedicated to religious life could never possess. He spoke of university degrees, technical certifications, and specific knowledge about hydraulics, pneumatics, and industrial electrical systems as if they were mystical secrets inaccessible to ordinary people, especially women who had chosen careers unrelated to engineering. Helen patiently listened to the entire condescending dissertation, but internally felt a growing determination that surprised her with its intensity. It was as if every disrespectful word from Charles was gradually awakening the young mechanic she had been 15 years earlier, bringing back not only the technical knowledge she had acquired, but also the unwavering confidence in her own abilities that had characterized her youth in her father's workshop. When Charles finally finished his arrogant explanation and turned to continue his useless inspection of the machine, Helen stepped forward and repeated her offer of help, this time with a firmness in her voice that made several people present pay more serious attention to what she was proposing. "I would really like to try and help," she said, addressing Mr. Robert directly and completely ignoring the expressions of disdain Charles was making behind her back. Mr. Robert looked at Helen with an expression of genuine consideration, mentally weighing the pros and cons of allowing her to try and diagnose the machine's problem. On one hand, he had personally witnessed her dedication and intelligence during previous factory visits, and he knew she was a serious and responsible person who wouldn't make such a proposal lightly. On the other hand, he was aware of the potential risks of allowing someone without official credentials to tamper with equipment so expensive and important to the entire company's operation. Charles, however, did not show the same respectful consideration as the supervisor, reacting immediately with a mix of irritation and condescending amusement that made it clear how absurd he considered any suggestion that Helen could significantly contribute to solving that complex technical problem. "Mr. Robert," he said with a forced laugh, "I hope you're not seriously considering letting a nun tinker with a machine that's worth more than most houses in this town." Helen felt a wave of heat rise up her neck, not from shame, but from a controlled indignation that vividly reminded her of occasions when she had faced similar skepticism during her youth in her father's workshop. She knew that words alone would not be enough to convince anyone of her technical competence, especially in the face of active resistance from someone like Charles, who had so much ego invested in maintaining his position as the only qualified person present. It was then that Helen made a decision that surprised even herself with its boldness. She calmly approached the stalled machine and began to examine it with a methodology and precision that immediately caught the attention of everyone present, including Charles, who stopped laughing when he realized she was following a specific diagnostic protocol that demonstrated real knowledge about that type of equipment. Helen began by visually checking all external components of the hydraulic press, carefully observing the oil leakage patterns, the position of the safety valves, the state of the pressurized hoses, and the general condition of the electrical system that controlled automated operations. Her hands moved with a confidence and familiarity that drastically contrasted with her external appearance as a nun dedicated exclusively to pastoral and spiritual work. As she performed her initial inspection, Helen explained aloud each step of the diagnostic process, using precise technical terminology that demonstrated a deep knowledge of industrial hydraulic systems, leaving several experienced employees nodding in recognition. She spoke about differential pressure in the main valves, about possible problems in the hydraulic oil filtering system, and about specific symptoms that could indicate failures in the main actuation cylinders. Charles observed the entire demonstration with an expression that gradually evolved from condescending amusement to genuine confusion, and finally, to a growing concern that perhaps he was witnessing something he couldn't fully comprehend or explain. The way Helen handled the basic tools available, the way she interpreted the machine's visual and auditory cues, and especially the specific technical vocabulary she used, suggested a level of familiarity with industrial equipment that simply didn't make sense considering her current occupation. After approximately 15 minutes of careful inspection, Helen stepped away from the machine and turned to face the group of people who had gathered to observe her technical analysis. She took a deep breath, mentally organized her conclusions, and began to explain her preliminary diagnosis with a clarity and confidence that made even Charles pay serious attention to what she was saying. "Based on what I've observed," she said, addressing Mr. Robert primarily, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, "the main problem appears to be related to a failure in the pressure control system of the secondary hydraulic circuit. The leak you're seeing isn't the cause of the problem, but rather a symptom of a relief valve that's stuck in the open position due to debris accumulation in the oil return filter." Helen paused for a moment, observing the reactions of those present, before continuing with a growing confidence that surprised even herself. Helen's precise technical explanation caused an impressive silence throughout the bay, where even the constant noise of other operating machines seemed to have diminished to allow everyone to fully process what they had just heard. Charles was visibly shaken, alternating his gaze between Helen and the machine, as if trying to find a logical explanation for the detailed technical knowledge she had demonstrated so naturally and confidently. Helen continued her explanation, now with a technical fluency that revealed years of practical experience no book or theoretical course could provide. "If I am correct in my diagnosis," she said, pointing to specific machine components with a precision that impressed even the most experienced workers, "the necessary repair doesn't require new parts or external specialized technicians. What we need to do is carefully disassemble the main relief valve assembly, thoroughly clean the clogged filter, and check for excessive wear on the sealing rings that could be causing additional pressure loss in the system." Mr. Robert listened to every word with increasing attention, instinctively recognizing that this diagnosis made much more technical sense than anything Charles had suggested during his superficial and arrogant inspection. Helen's explanation not only identified a specific and plausible cause for the problem, but also proposed a practical solution that could be implemented immediately without significant additional costs or prolonged production delays. Charles tried to regain his technical authority by questioning some aspects of Helen's diagnosis, but it quickly became evident to everyone present that he was asking questions based more on wounded ego than on actual technical knowledge. His attempts to contradict Helen only served to further highlight the difference between the superficial theoretical knowledge he possessed and the deep practical experience she was demonstrating so consistently and confidently. Helen then did something that left everyone absolutely dumbfounded. She asked Mr. Robert for a basic toolbox and began systematically disassembling the components of the main relief valve with a manual dexterity and procedural knowledge that made it clear she had performed exactly that type of repair many times before. Her hands worked with an economical precision that wasted no unnecessary movements, and she was able to access internal machine components that Charles didn't even know existed. As she worked, Helen maintained an educational conversation with the employees present, explaining each step of the repair process and sharing practical technical tips that could help them identify and prevent similar problems in the future. She spoke about the importance of regular preventive maintenance of filtering systems, about how to recognize early signs of wear in critical components, and about simple diagnostic techniques that could save considerable time and money in future situations. After approximately 45 minutes of concentrated work, Helen carefully removed the clogged filter from the hydraulic system and showed it to everyone. The filter was completely saturated with metallic debris and degraded oil residues that had accumulated over months of operation without proper maintenance. It was exactly the kind of problem that, if not properly corrected, could cause catastrophic failures throughout the machine's entire hydraulic system. Helen meticulously cleaned the filter, using appropriate solvents and techniques that preserved the integrity of the filtering materials, then carefully checked the condition of all sealing rings and related components before completely reassembling the system. Throughout the entire process, she maintained a professional and focused demeanor that sharply contrasted with the tension and uncertainty that had dominated the atmosphere before her intervention. The most dramatic moment arrived when Helen finished reassembling all the components and prepared to test the repaired machine. She double-checked all connections, confirmed that all safety systems were properly positioned, and then went to the main control panel to initiate the hydraulic press's activation sequence. The silence in the bay was virtually absolute, with dozens of people holding their breath as they waited to see if Helen's diagnosis and repair had been effective. When she pressed the start button, the machine responded immediately with the smooth, regular sound that indicated normal and efficient operation. All pressure parameters returned to normal operating levels. The oil leak stopped completely, and the press completed a full test cycle without any sign of irregularity or residual technical problem. The sound of the machine running perfectly echoed throughout the bay like a symphony of relief and admiration, breaking the tense silence that had dominated the atmosphere during the final moments of the repair. Employees began to applaud spontaneously, a genuine demonstration of gratitude and respect that made Helen feel a deep emotion she hadn't experienced in many years. It was the feeling of having used her natural talents to make a real difference in the lives of people who truly needed help. Charles stood in a corner of the bay, visibly stunned by the extraordinary technical demonstration he had just witnessed. All his previous arrogance had completely dissipated, replaced by an expression of confusion and discomfort that revealed how profoundly that experience had shaken his convictions about technical competence, formal education, and social prejudices he had carried throughout his professional career. Mr. Robert approached Helen with an expression of sincere gratitude and genuine admiration that went far beyond mere relief at having solved the machine's problem. "Sister Helen," he said with an emotional voice, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today for our company and for all the employees who depend on this work to support their families. You saved not only our production, but also the jobs of many good, hard-working people. Helen smiled warmly and replied that she was very happy to have been able to help, explaining that using her technical knowledge to benefit others was one of the most gratifying ways to serve God and fulfill her vocation of charity and service to others. She mentioned that during her years of religious formation, she had learned that all the talents and abilities we possess are gifts that should be used for the common good, especially when we can alleviate the suffering or worry of people going through difficulties. It was at this moment that Charles finally approached the group, walking slowly with a body posture completely different from the arrogance he had previously displayed. His expression was that of someone undergoing a deep internal process of re-evaluating values and prejudices he had considered unquestionable just minutes before. He stopped before Helen and remained silent for a few seconds, clearly struggling to find adequate words to express what he was feeling. "Sister Helen," Charles finally said, with a voice notably more humble and respectful than he had used all morning, "I owe you a sincere apology for my earlier behavior. I was completely wrong to judge your capabilities based solely on your appearance and current occupation, and I recognize that my attitude was disrespectful not only to you, but also to all the employees of this factory, whom I treated condescendingly." Helen listened to Charles's apology with a serene and understanding expression, without any trace of triumph or satisfaction at the humiliation he was experiencing. Instead, she responded with a graciousness that demonstrated the spiritual and emotional maturity she had developed during her years of religious life, dedicated to forgiveness and understanding universal human weaknesses. "Mr. Sutton," she said gently, "we all carry prejudices and make hasty judgments sometimes. The important thing is when we recognize our mistakes and are willing to learn and grow from these experiences. I hold no resentment for what happened today, and I hope we can work together collaboratively to ensure this factory continues to run well and provide job security for all employees." The transformation in Charles was visible not only in his words, but in his entire posture and facial expression. He seemed genuinely interested in learning more about Helen's technical knowledge and began asking respectful questions about her previous experience with industrial equipment. Helen briefly shared the story of her work in her father's workshop, explaining how she had developed her skills during her youth and how she considered that knowledge an additional tool for her charitable and community service work. The factory employees gradually approached to express their personal gratitude to Helen, many of them commenting on how her intervention had literally saved their jobs and the financial stability of their families. It was evident that that moment had become much more than simply solving a technical problem. It had transformed into a powerful lesson about humility, recognizing talent in unexpected places, and the importance of treating all people with respect and dignity, regardless of their social position or professional occupation. In the weeks that followed that transformative day at the factory, Helen's life underwent subtle but significant changes she never would have anticipated when she woke up that Tuesday morning for her routine charity visit. News of her exceptional technical intervention spread rapidly throughout the region's industrial community, creating an unexpected reputation that opened doors to a completely new form of community service that perfectly combined her technical skills with her religious vocation. Mr. Robert had shared the story with other business owners in the region during a local Chamber of Commerce meeting, and soon Helen began receiving invitations to visit other factories and companies, not only as a church representative offering spiritual support, but also as a volunteer technical consultant who could help solve complex mechanical problems that occasionally arose in the city's industrial operations. Charles had also undergone a profound transformation that surprised even himself. The experience of witnessing Helen's exceptional competence and recognizing his own prejudices had prompted a complete re-evaluation of his professional and personal approach. He began to treat factory employees with much more respect and consideration, dedicating time to learn from their practical experience and acknowledging that formal education was not the only valid source of knowledge and technical competence. More importantly, Charles decided to seek out Helen a few weeks later for a private conversation that revealed the profound emotional impact that day had had on his life. He explained that he had grown up in a family where university education and professional titles were considered the only valid measures of human worth and competence, and that this mindset had created in him an automatic arrogance toward people who did not share his privileged educational background. Helen listened to Charles's confession with the patience and understanding that characterized her pastoral approach, offering perspectives on forgiveness, personal growth, and the importance of recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of all people, regardless of their background or circumstances. She shared reflections on how her own spiritual journey had taught her that pride and humility are conscious choices we make daily, and that we all have constant opportunities to grow and become better people. The most surprising aspect of this new phase of Helen's life was when she received an unexpected call from Master John, her father, who had heard through mutual acquaintances about her intervention at the factory and wanted to speak with her for the first time in over 15 years. His voice on the phone was laden with mixed emotions: pride in the technical competence she had demonstrated, regret over the prolonged family estrangement, and curiosity about how she had maintained and applied the knowledge he had taught her over so many years. The reunion between father and daughter took place on a sunny Sunday afternoon in the workshop, where Helen had learned everything about industrial mechanics. Master John had visibly aged during the years of separation, but his eyes still sparkled with the same enthusiasm for machines and equipment that Helen remembered from her youth. They spent hours talking about repair techniques, innovations in industrial equipment, and gradually about the void Helen's absence had left both in the workshop and in the heart of the entire family. Helen explained to her father how her religious vocation hadn't diminished her appreciation for the technical knowledge he had given her, but rather had provided a broader context for using those skills in service to others. She described how she had found a unique way to combine her spiritual life with her technical competence, creating opportunities to serve the community in ways that wouldn't have been possible if she had followed only one of the paths available. Master John finally understood that Helen's choice for religious life had not been a rejection of everything he had taught her, but rather an expansion and transformation of those teachings into something greater and more significant. The mutual forgiveness that emerged from that conversation healed wounds that had remained open for over a decade, restoring not only the family relationship, but also creating a new foundation of respect and admiration between father and daughter. Helen continued her work at the parish, but now with an additional dimension that deeply enriched her community service. She became known as the nun who could solve both spiritual and mechanical problems, creating a unique bridge between faith and technical skill that inspired people from all backgrounds and occupations. Charles became an active advocate for diversity and inclusion in technical environments, using his position to promote opportunities for talented individuals regardless of their background. The factory became a model of respectful collaboration between different levels of education and experience. Reconciliation with Master John opened a new chapter in Helen's life, where she could honor both her spiritual vocation and her family heritage. She had discovered that serving God didn't mean abandoning her natural talents, but rather finding creative ways to use them for the common good. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we have the courage to be authentically ourselves.